Good morning and happy Monday, friends. I'm so glad you decided to join me to get your day started with a biblical perspective here on A Moment with Hales. We're going to be continuing in our 2025 Enjoying God's Peace series, so let's jump right in. Today we're going to get pretty practical because I know all of us as human beings, and specifically as women, we probably deal with being worried or anxious, honestly, probably on a daily basis. And I wanted to kind of get practical on how we can approach these emotions with a biblical perspective this morning. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into 1 Peter 5, where Peter says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you." So here we have three practical applications from these verses. So when we are worried, first, we should humble ourselves. As Peter says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand. This goes back to kind of what we talked about last week with Job. At the end of Job's conversation with God, he realized that he needed to retract his statements, repent on what he said, and sit on the ashes. He just needed to sit on down because he realized how little he actually knew after having a conversation with God, the God of the universe, our God. So being humble under God's mighty hand is definitely a good step when you're feeling that you're worried or anxious. And sometimes our worries and anxieties can actually come from not having enough information, or on the opposite, having too much information. So an example that came to mind here for me is it reminds me of when I Google something. Like, I'll give an example if my dog is acting weird or sick or whatever, and I feel like I'm worried about them and I don't know what's going on. So let me go ahead and Google the symptom that they're presenting, and then I feel like I Google it and I worry because I have too much information from Google. So it's either I don't know enough, so I'm worried, and then I know too much, so I'm worried again. So when we're worried or anxious, the first thing we can do is just humble ourselves before the God of the universe and realize we don't know everything. Secondly, Peter says, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. And friends, that doesn't mean necessarily tomorrow or in the next 30 minutes. Sometimes in our due time, it can really mean the other side of the grave when we're going to know eternal peace. I know that's not what we want to hear, but there are situations or circumstances, which I've shared in this series with you guys, that sometimes we just won't have the answer to when we're here living on earth. And third, Peter says, cast all your anxiety on him, the Lord, because he cares for you. I love that Peter added the because he cares for you, because obviously cast your anxiety on him, cast your cares on the Lord. Okay, that's great. But also he cares for you. And I think this is a good reminder for us as human beings and as women to have an important distinction, because I feel like we've all been in a situation where we've poured our heart out to someone, or we're really sharing a story or an experience that we had, and the person's response is just not what we really wanted, or we feel like they're not as emotionally invested in our situation. Like, why aren't they being more empathetic, or why aren't they more excited for us? And God doesn't do that. When we go before him and bring our worries to him, he's attentive and he listens. He's just as invested as we are. Sure, sometimes I do think he might laugh at our limited human minds, at least at me. I'm sure sometimes I bring worries to the Lord and he's like, oh, Haley, here you go again. But he's there and he's listening and he's invested and he cares. So I can cast my worries on him because I know that he's listening and he's being attentive to me. In 1 Peter 3, Peter outlines what godly living looks like, and he brings up peace. He says, "The one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it." When we are facing anxiety or worry, we must seek and pursue peace. So in order to remove worry, we must practically replace it with something else. And I've talked about this before. If we want to remove an old habit or a sin from our life, it's not really the best idea to just say, I won't do it again. We need to have a plan, something put in place that we're not just going to put off the old self, but actually put the new self on. So an example, if I want to stop gossiping when I'm in a conversation and I want to say something really negative about somebody, I'm going to work in the habit of replacing that negative comment with maybe giving a compliment of the individual, or just stop talking or something like that. Have a plan in place. If I want to stop scrolling or wasting my time on social media, I need to replace it. When I find myself scrolling, then I'm going to read, or I'm going to go for a walk, or whatever. It's hard to just omit something without a premeditated plan to replace it. This even applies to diet. If I want to cut out some caffeine, then instead of just saying I'm not going to have my coffee in the morning, may replace it with decaf or a turmeric latte or something like that. So in this instance, when we're anxious, we need to seek and pursue peace. And what does that look like for you? It's going to look differently for every single person. Maybe it's memorizing a Bible verse about peace and just repeating it when you're feeling anxious. Maybe it's transforming your worry into a prayer. Maybe it's going for a walk or a run when you start to feel these anxious, feelings and worried thoughts and all these different things. Maybe it's going out and checking on your chickens, which sometimes I do when I feel really anxious. They make me feel happy and I check for eggs. Friends, this is a struggle that really has become real in my life. I don't know if it's hormonal or the shorter days or being cooped up inside because it's winter or whatever, but I noticed that sometimes when I'm anxious, I just need something else to think about. And I've done a lot of different things for myself. I started doing my wine club again so I could research topics when I started to feel anxious to get my mind off of it. This podcast, I think, has really helped me through the winter months. When it gets dark outside, I can sit down and write, and that's helped me. And now my anxiety is really hitting me when I'm trying to go to sleep. So I've really started to, when I'm going to bed, pray for specific people in my life when I start to get anxious as I'm falling asleep. And honestly, sometimes I just watch Gilmore Girls or turn on my book light and read when I'm in bed. So I have to pursue peace in different ways. And I'm sure that's not necessarily what Peter meant here, not watching Gilmore Girls while he's falling asleep, but pursuing peace sometimes is practically just a change of pace. And honestly, even drinking magnesium before I go to bed, I swear that helps me calm myself. But sometimes when you're feeling anxious, just switch it up, do something different, and give yourself a moment to reflect and relax. Okay, and moving on over to Romans 8, Paul writes, "For those who are in accordance with the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh, but those who are in accordance with the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mind set on flesh is hostile towards God, for it does not subject itself to the law, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God." Often our anxieties and worries can feel so legitimate and justified to us. Like I've shared this before, I equate responsibility with worry, and some things feel like they're worth worrying about. An unanswered medical diagnosis, if your kid is out driving for the first time on their own with their driver's license, a marital struggle that keeps coming up, or trying to calculate how you're going to pay the bills. As a human and as an adult, it feels like we should be worried and consumed with these things, right? But Paul says it here, "For the mind set on the flesh is death." Friends, last week we were reminded that now, because we are believers, we are no longer at odds with God in this life. Our sin has been reconciled, and we are now free from the separation that we had from God. And we're also freed from probably the most feared aspect of life, death. That doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean that we feel peace in our day-to-day all the time. And that doesn't mean we don't suffer or have to deal with disappointments or unmet expectations. Friends, the battle for our minds is alive and well. It's so delicate, and the Bible talks so much about protecting our minds. Between the music and the movies and the TV and the politics, the sexual promiscuity, social media, it's all a war for our minds and our mindset and attention. When we find ourselves getting consumed or bulldozed by the world, let's practically apply what Paul says. Even in the midst of all the world, all the chaos, all the worries, the mind set on the Spirit is life and peace. So friends, let's get practical. Next time you find yourself worried or anxious, first, humble yourself. Second, remember it's okay not to have the answer. Third, cast your anxiety on the Lord and knows that He hears you and that He's invested in you. Fourth, then biblically seek and pursue peace. And fifth, take a moment to enjoy life and reflect on God's gift of peace, as our time on this earth is short, but our eternity is set in Him. And that can be as simple as a walk with your kids, savoring something delicious, curling up with a book, getting on your knees to pray, or listening to some worship music while you wash the dishes. This week, let's get practical with our peace. Let's intentionally pursue setting our minds on the Spirit. This will give us the ability to enjoy life more as a result of God's gift of eternal peace. Well, thanks for listening, friends. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You're all truly an encouragement to me. Thank you again for stopping by and taking a listen to this episode. If you'd like to see more, check out the YouTube, A Moment with Hales. I have a lot of different stuff on there. My Coffee and Conspiracy will be up soon. I'm just working on the research. I hope you all have fabulous weeks, and I'll be talking to you soon.